My name's Tom Cunningham. I'm the Deputy Director of the Global Energy Center. I just want to note we have a missing Minister Cortica, and we hope that he comes in a moment. He disappeared. So, Deputy Director of the Global Energy Center, I want to welcome you especially. This is our first event in Washington after our very successful Global Energy Forum in Abu Dhabi earlier in January. I'm very pleased to welcome our guests today. Mr. Dominique Ristori, Director General for Energy of the European Commission, Dr. Michał Kurtyka, who will be in a moment, and I will make a wink when he comes in so you know, Mr. Piotr Niemski, who's Secretary of State in the Prime Minister's Chancery and the government's plenipotentiary for strategic energy infrastructure with the Republic of Poland. My boss, Ambassador Richard Morningstar, founding director and chairman of the Global Energy Center and former ambassador to the European Union. And last but not least, Miss Emily Meredith, who's the Deputy Bureau Chief of Energy Intelligence. She will moderate. We will have, I'm just going to introduce everyone and get out of the way, and Mr. Ristori will give some opening remarks. Minister Kurtyka will give some opening remarks, and then we'll have a panel conversation. I want to say very quickly before we begin, though, that the Atlantic Council represents these Atlanticist values: free trade, good relationships with our friends and allies, strong alliances. And the Global Energy Center wants to espouse those values and build those values in the energy space. There's some brochures up front about our center, and we're very interested in partnering with you if you're interested. Come see any of us on the team, talk about ways we can work together. This is a very important topic at a very important time. This is one of the first visits of Europeans to talk specifically about energy issues in Washington. We're very eager to hear their perspectives. We at the Energy Center have done some of our own research and analysis on this issue. You'll see up front we have a report from our chairman of our Energy Advisory Board, David Goldwyn, on the energy outlook under a Trump administration. So grab one of those on your way out. I also want to say that today is important in the context of our Wrocław Global Forum and the 3 Cs initiative promoted by Poland and supported by the European Commission. Thank you. That has its roots in a 2014 report called Completing Europe from the North-South Corridor to Energy, Transportation, and Telecommunications Union. Polish President Andrzej Duda and Croatian President Kolina Grabar-Kitarovic in 2016 in Dubrovnik led discussions on a rechristened 3 Cs initiative. In that declaration concluding that meeting, the participants agreed to reconvene with our annual Wrocław Global Forum, which will be held in July 6th and 7th. This 3 Cs summit will convene presidents, ministers, and business leaders from 12 European Union member states, as well as representatives from the United States. There are also plans to include high-level officials from Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and Turkey. That's it from me. Now please welcome to the stage Dominique Ristori, Director General for Energy with the European Commission.
Thank you very much, Tom, Minister, Ambassador, dear Richard. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here this morning in the Atlantic Council. Last time in Washington, it was just after the end of the EU-US Transatlantic Energy Council. And Richard, you have been the pioneer, the architect of this fantastic approach. Accordingly, I'm very pleased, together with some of our colleagues and partners in Europe, Polish colleagues, today, at an important time, at the time you have in US a new president. You will have also soon those in charge of diplomacy and energy. But let me say, first of all, EU-US energy cooperation has been a real transatlantic success story. And this has been possible because, first of all, we share the same values and the same vision regarding open and competitive energy market. the same values and the same approach regarding non-politicized energy market. And this should remain one important point in the context of our bilateral relation and cooperation on energy. And I would like also to pay tribute to US to the support given to Europe regarding the implementation, full implementation of our EU acquis on energy, in particular the third energy package. But we had also in common the same vision regarding energy security. And we had a lot to do in the recent past, particularly oriented to diversification of suppliers and diversification of route, in particular in some area where we have some member states more vulnerable or only dependent to one dominant supplier. And as you know, and my Polish colleague can or will confirm that, we made and we are making a lot of progress. For example, we signed last year, in margin of an European Council, the new gas interconnector between Poland and Lithuania, GIPA. And we will do the thing in order to consolidate that. But we manage also for electricity important projects, including those from Poland to the Baltic, Litpol, as well as Nordbalt from Sweden to the Baltic countries, with a new capacity already operational of more than 1,200 megawatt. And I could also add many other projects already signed or in progress from, for example, Finland and Estonia, the Baltic interconnector, but also many others in the context of Central and Southeast Europe. And this will remain and should remain an important priority because, as you know, missing key interconnection are representing an obstacle to competitive market and to energy independence. But we had also in common the capacity to act together into the direction of clean energy. Clean and at the same time competitive. Because, and we presented just at the end of November, the most important legislative package ever presented in the history of energy in Europe, the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, with 8 legislative proposals, but presented in the sense of offering a unique opportunity, a unique economic opportunity for all Europeans, including European economy. Because when we are pushing new energies, when we are pushing energy efficiency, for example, the renovation of all existing park, 80% of our park, this is opening fantastic new possibilities in terms of market. And behind, you have the construction sector. 18 million of jobs in Europe, 8% of GDP. You have engineering industries, 11 million of jobs. And you have still, it's impossible to do the things properly in the construction sector without using steel. And I know how this is important also in the United States. Accordingly, managing a shift into the direction of a more cleaner energy is not at all abandoning competitiveness, the support to economic growth and creation of jobs. We believe, we firmly believe, it is possible, yes, in particular in the context of implementation of Paris Agreement, it is possible to combine economic development, development of GDP, and at the same time cutting emissions and reducing energy consumption. This is an important challenge requiring also the mobilization of all our intelligence. And I have in mind in particular research, new technologies, innovation, covering the whole chain of energy, generation, transmission, distribution, but also storage and demand, and requiring also to adapt the rules of a regulatory framework in order to facilitate this process. I will not prejudge, and it is not possible to prejudge, some evolution regarding US energy policy, but I am convinced we will have a lot to do in common regarding all these important fronts. I mean, the open and competitive global market, enriched now by more quantities of energy also arriving from US, but also energy security, but also some key aspect of sustainability. And I hope we will be in situation to prolong what you have, Ambassador, contributing a lot to build at the beginning of this process. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Now, Minister Niemski, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, ministers, thank you very much for inviting me to this place. I do remember this place from 90s. Atlantic Council is member of ATA, organization associated with NATO. It was the first NATO structure which was joined by Poles before we joined NATO. So thank you very much. We had good contacts and support from Atlantic Council at that time. Let me start quoting something we know very well, but anyway, it's time probably to remind it. The parties are determined to safeguard the freedom, common heritage, and civilization of their peoples, founded on the principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. They seek to promote stability and well-being in the North Atlantic area. 49. Cooperation between our countries is based on values, common interests, mutual trust, and necessary deep commitment. But above all, we have to recognize that the world changes. Europe changes, America changes, and we have to adapt. We have to think about the security of our nations, having in mind what are the new threats are ahead of us. I believe that the energy security is one of the fundamentals of the security as it should be. It's even more important with the time. Sometimes it's even the most important. Safe deliveries of energy and energy sources, they could be a kind of a cornerstone for the independence and security of our economies and our countries. The truth is that energy security is to be saved and secure by our governments on a nation level. So the American government and our European governments, as we have them, 28, they are responsible. It means that they must have tools for that. And there is no international organization yet which could replace our government in such a responsibility. If it is so, it's necessary to have cooperation between our countries on the governmental level, intergovernmental level. This is what is needed. And probably the experiences we've got from NATO history is something which could be basis for future cooperation in energy. Probably we could, in a sense, expand NATO beyond military dimension to energy dimension. I believe it's worth to think about it. I believe that we can stay on a principle that our nations, every one of them, are first. America is first, and France is first, and Poland is first. First for our citizens. But we have to cooperate. And probably such a meeting like this one today, when the American government is in the transition and the European Union is in crisis, probably it's good to start to talk about this kind of new cooperation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Ambassador Morningstar and Tom, for hosting this. I wanted to jump right in here. We know more or less what a U.S. approach to transatlantic energy cooperation looked like under the previous administration. There was a heavy emphasis on diversity of supplies, and that translated to joint efforts on clean energy and climate change issues. And also, there was some quite vocal opposition from the US government to additional routes for piped Russian gas. But that's been the last 4 and 8 years. So I wanted to start off with asking you all what you hope transatlantic energy cooperation looks like under the Trump administration, and if you can, what you're expecting it might look like. Director General Ristori, do you want to start us off?
As our guest, why don't you start?
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you very much Thank you for your question. Thank you for coming today. It's an important moment, moment of transition, and it is interesting for us from Europe, and in particular from a country like Poland, to be there in Washington and to have the possibility to share our vision of energy. And so I would like to thank Atlantic Council for organizing this meeting, and also thank Dominique for sharing this panel with us. What has been the priority of Poland since 10 years will not change. We have achieved a lot. We have built a new LNG terminal, the biggest LNG terminal in Świnoujście in the Baltic Sea. Right now we have the possibility to bring LNG from all over the world, including from United States, to make sure that, as Dominique said, the question of energy is not politicized, but that we can have a liquid, competitive, well-functioning market of energy in Europe. But we are not yet there. And this is why we are pursuing a very important project for us, which is Northern Gate, which shall link Polish coast in the northern Poland via Denmark with Norwegian shelf. And what is interesting is that Polish companies do have shares in this Norwegian shelf since 10 years, but we were not be able to get a direct link with another source of supply of gas. And with the Northern Gate, we will complete picture in terms of diversification of supply of gas to Central Europe, because that concerns not only Poland, but also Central European countries. So I think that remains the backbone of our thinking about the future of strategy, the future of energy. And in this regard, we are very interested in voicing our aims and objectives at such meeting as today. Of course, the other way to secure the provision of energy in Europe, and in particular in a country like Poland, is to make sure that we do have and we are able to develop competitive technologies. In this regard, shale revolution has been a major shake in the world energy panorama, opening new providers of oil and gas, completely reshaping the geopolitics of oil and gas in the world. And although we strived to develop also shale gas in Poland, specialists say rocks are there, but the prices are not there. So we do have shale gas in Poland, but with current level of prices, we should make sure that it's really a profitable opportunity for us to dig into. But it opened a wide panorama for other possibilities like tight gas, methane, and others. So it is yet another possibility to continue transatlantic partnership around competitive technologies that can secure new sources of energy for European countries and for Poland in particular. And last but not least, Poland has a particularity, a specificity in Europe of relying very much on domestic source, which is coal. And in this regard, we are a little bit outside of the traditional European scheme in terms of relying not only heavily on coal, but also believing in the future of clean coal technologies. And in this regard, we would be very happy to continue building links with our American colleagues and finding ways in which these technologies, these new technologies, could be brought forward. Last but not least, it's certainly the question of nuclear and whether or not what would be the attitude of the new administration towards new nuclear builds, in particular small reactors. That is also the part of competitive technologies, and that would be interesting for us to follow and to engage in. So maybe I stop right now in terms of introductory remarks, but I will be happy to answer the questions.
Great. Sounds like a heavy emphasis on technology from your side. So, yeah.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be part of such a terrific panel. It really is. With my Atlantic Council hat on, let me welcome a couple of more people here. Ambassador Vilcik from Poland, Ambassador, I always just say Rika because her last name is so hard. Ambassador Semikani, is that close? From Hungary, who has a tremendous energy background, which is important, I know, to your role here in Washington. I don't know if we have any more present ambassadors here. If there, we do have former ambassador, my close friend, Ambassador András Simony, who was the Hungarian ambassador to the U.S. and now is at SAIS, and and I'll make the general point first that whatever the new administration's policy is with respect to energy, it's going to be even more important, I think, for organizations like the Atlantic Council, like the Center for Transatlantic Studies, where András is managing director, and people outside of the government to keep talking, keep thinking, keep making recommendations, and not to let these issues fall off the table. Let me make a few more, maybe more general comments. It's great again to be with Dominique, who we were there at the creation for the US-EU Energy Council, or EU-US Energy Council. Depends if you're American, you say the US-EU, and if you're European, you say EU-US. But in any event, and I think that we need to urge, and I hope that the new Secretary of State, given his energy background, will see that it's important to continue the work of the Energy Council. And there's a lot of work that can be done that, as you point out, that will be in the interest of both Europe and the United States. You were involved at the beginning, Dominique, on the research and technology side when you were the DG there. There's still a tremendous amount of work that can be done on research and technology. I might say including things like carbon sequestration, that coal is a fact of life in a place like Poland, and if there is really a technology that works, we would be foolhardy not to push it. Maybe new nuclear technologies, a lot of other things that can relate to climate change. There's a lot that can be done with respect, as you said also, with respect to innovation, with respect to jobs, with respect to competitiveness, all of which should be of interest to this new administration. One of the issues that does continue to come up would be, what effect will a change in our relationship with Russia have on European energy security? And we'll see if there is a change. As you all know, we've been very outspoken. I've been very outspoken about issues like Nord Stream 2. issues about the need for diversification. And I hope that even if the administration pulls back with respect to the Nord Stream 2 issue, for example, that there are still some very important points that need to be made. The issue doesn't necessarily need to be anti-Nord Stream 2, but it would certainly be in our interest that in the United States as well as in Europe, that there be pro-diversification. And that this administration is very interested in promoting LNG exports. I can make the argument that there's a contradiction between Nord Stream 2 and LNG exports. Some might disagree with that, but in any event, as long as we are pushing on this side of the ocean and on the European side of the ocean for diversification, I think that is tremendously important. And I think that's an approach that would make sense, I would think, certainly to somebody like Tillerson, hopefully to the new Secretary of Energy and within the White House. And we need to, I think, be very cognizant of framing the issues to this administration in a way that they will find more than acceptable, that will make sense. And that includes things like, as we said before, jobs, innovation, competitiveness, diversification. We'll see what happens on sanctions. We'll see what happens on Nord Stream 2. But we also have to remember, and sometimes I say to myself, God, does it make a whole lot of difference what the United States says? It might make some difference on the margins. But these are still European issues. And there are divisions within Europe, I think, on some of these issues. And hopefully, whatever this administration thinks or does, that Europe will continue to push towards an integrated market, to push towards increased diversification. Europe's relationship with Russia is going to be what it's going to be, maybe whatever we say or do. So we do have to remember this is still a European issue.
Do you want to speak to this issue?
Yes. First of all, I will confirm the three main priorities we have in mind regarding the cooperation EU-US on energy market, diversification in the context of energy security, and pushing innovation in all fronts. I would like to add, with market is crystal clear, we will oppose firmly any attempt to politicize market from other key actors. And as you know, this has been the case in the past and also in the recent past. Second, we have also with US managed in common some key issues, such as Ukraine. We have supported our partner from the beginning in order to reduce Ukrainian dependence on energy. In particular, in 2 years, it has been possible to organize reverse flow from Slovakia, from Hungary, from Poland to Ukraine. Since 1 year now, Ukraine has not imported any gas from Russia. And Ukraine has also reduced dramatically its energy consumption. So we would like to prolong this approach, and we have largely insisted on that at the occasion of a recent summit with Ukraine at the end of November in Brussels, in the presence of President Poroshenko. Second, we have also managed with US the important agreement with Iran, as you know. And this agreement is based mainly on guarantees and on verification. And we will also insist with the new administration in order to give a clear priority to the full implementation of the Joint Comprehensive Action Plan. Because, you know, regarding this type of extremely sensitive issues, it is particularly important to see the two main actors, US and the EU, having also the command of the most sensitive nuclear technologies, including enrichment through centrifugation and reprocessing, paving the way in order to ensure with international atomic energy agencies the verification will give sufficient guarantees in order to possibly open the door for other type of cooperations. Regarding the front of technologies, let me say this will be decisive in all fronts. The point you refer, Richard, and the point you refer, Michel, because when I am considering, first of all, the digital new technologies, in the context of a rapid digitalization of energy system, and in particular energy grid, this will represent a key challenge. The same is valid at the time we should together, US and EU, give more priority to cyber security in the context everybody knows. And energy critical infrastructure, including not only transmission but distribution grid, should be subject to common approach in that direction. The same is true when we are speaking about carbon capture and sequestration or carbon capture and use, because, as you know, this is requiring massive investment in research and technologies and innovation, and we are still only at the level of big demonstration project. But the same is also valid when we are speaking about energy and storage. Electricity sector, let me say, will become more and more strategic. Why? Because you see, even when the energy demand will decrease, electricity demand will increase, requiring not only an adequate regulatory framework, and we have just proposed that at the end of November, for not only incorporating more flexibility in the system, but also more security. But at the same time, we are opening new market. The new market coming from digital market, but also the new market coming from electromobility. And electromobility, interoperability between electric vehicles and smart grid will become fundamental, as well as the same is valid when we are speaking about smart home. We are just before a real energy revolution. In the same model, we had this revolution for telecom. I mean with a small industrial device, it will be possible to have a full command of the whole energy consumption. And this will require investment and innovation in order to finish with the most performant equipment. And this is a challenge for US industry as it is a challenge for European industry. And this is valid anytime we are speaking about generation, transmission, distribution of demand. Because, you know, we have also new energies. We would like not only to import some industrial equipment necessary for photovoltaic solar energy. The same is valid also when we are speaking about turbine. All these aspects will require, in summary, a real mobilization of forces and cooperation between US and the EU key actors. You have in US a lot of very performant labs combining public and private research and intelligence. We have also some, and this should remain or should become also one of the top priorities in the following months and years.
Okay. I'm hearing a lot on technology and investment cooperation. I want to move to something specific that Ambassador Morningstar brought up, which is, you know, there's some signals from the Trump administration that there could be a shift in the U.S. approach to Russia. And so I wanted to talk about, you know, if the U.S. were to scale back the degree to which it has protested against things like Nord Stream 2 and other pipeline projects into Europe, what do you expect the effects of that scaling back to be? Do you think we would see, you know, perhaps a more active role from Poland, similar to what we've seen from the last year? I don't know if you want to take that first.
Well, from my perspective, it's too early to comment. I'm not inside Washington, so what I can voice is only our interests from Warsaw. Certainly, as you mentioned, Nord Stream 2 is not, in our opinion, a pipe which adds to European security. It's not a commercial project. It is a project which can have disastrous effects on the Central European markets and on the security of supply for countries like Ukraine. And when we talk about security of supply, we cannot ignore that it's part also of the security in short, and that our efforts in terms of stopping Nord Stream 2 are related with these security concerns that we have. What I can see is that right now we have in Poland American troops coming, and so I consider this as part of an overall strategy aimed at increasing security in this part of the world, and I would be happy commenting from Warsaw and not being part of Washington discussion, which is outside of my reach. I would be happy if we could think of the future of security and security of supply together with our American partners.
I would certainly agree with that, and it's it is too soon to tell exactly what this administration's policy will be towards Nord Stream 2. If I were in Las Vegas and I had to bet, I'd sort of bet that it would become sort of neutral. That you may not hear that much from the U.S. administration about Nord Stream 2 like you have in the past. On the other hand, going back to some of the earlier points, there'll still be people like Andras and me screaming and ranting and raving about it, which we have been for the last few years. And don't forget also this whole issue with Russia. The Hill is going to have a lot to do with that, and that there are many on the Hill who feel very, very strongly about Central and Eastern Europe, very strongly about the need for European energy security and its relationship to Russian exports of gas. And the administration is going to have to deal with that as well. But I still come back to the point, ultimately, that I think that we need to do all these things, and if, to the extent the administration isn't talking about it, others do. but ultimately it's still going to be a European issue. And there are divisions within Europe, and if the Central and Eastern European countries continue to feel strongly about it, they need to make their views known within Europe, and that's what's going to determine this issue more than, certainly more than the United States. Sometimes I think we have, more of an influence than we really do, and we certainly have to be humble in expressing our opinions, I think.
Director General Ristori, how do you balance those divisions within Europe when formulating a policy on something like that, particularly with global sort of landscape changing?
Regarding all these aspects, it is important to base our judgment on fact and decision and position. When I am considering the rapid progress made in the front of energy security and security of supply for gas in Europe, because we have presented an important package aiming at increasing solidarity and finishing with a common position on all these issues, I am comforted on our capacity to react and to react based on only one voice and one position. Let me give one example. We presented in particular the proposal dedicated to intergovernmental agreement. I mean, agreement prepared by any member states with third countries on energy issues. The fact that we have been in situation, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank also our Polish colleague and Polish government. But the fact that we have been in a position to finish with the support of 28 member states and the support also of the parliament, in order to ensure in the future full compliance regarding any draft of intergovernmental agreement and EU acquis, all EU energy acquis, including provision on energy security, is a dramatic progress. I would like to recall that in the past we had some IGA in contradiction of EU acquis, but in support to some projects such as Nord Stream 2, but it was in the past South Stream. And the evolution of EU legislation into the direction of a reinforcement of the ex-ante assessment will allow to be even more productive regarding the evolution of European energy policy. And we will also enrich all this front in the context of security of supply gas regulation in the sense of organizing in Europe, in particular at regional level, what should be organized in case of emergency or crisis situation, and translating the concept of solidarity into practical decision. You see, we are presently one of the most active sectors in the context of new legislative proposals. But it is not only to add additional legislation. It is to reinforce the capacity of Europe to act at global level, at regional level, and united. And this, I think, as you said, will be fundamental and could help also to prolong that in the context of bilateral cooperation with US.
Okay.
Can I just follow up on that, which I agree. You know, one of the things that you talk about regulations and so forth, European law is tremendously important in all of this. And if you go back to South Stream and South Stream being shelved by the Russians, I don't think that was so much the politics. I mean, it related clearly to politics, but they recognized that it was never going to pass muster under European law in Brussels.
Yeah.
And I think a close look at how European law applies to Nord Stream 2, ultimately, even if it's by the Court of Justice, is ultimately going to be very important. And that if in fact the EU, like it did with respect to Nord Stream, and the Commission, and I know you feel this way, is very strong in enforcing its regulatory scheme, forcing all participants in the European market, including Gazprom, to act according to its rules, and at the same time implementing a real pro-diversification policy. That's what's going to be the determinant in the end. It's not going to be whether, we're screaming or ranting about Nord Stream 2. It's going to be what you all do and in those areas.
Absolutely.
I've got a couple more if we don't have questions from the audience, but I'd like to give people in the audience a chance to ask some questions. So, yep, we want to start right here. Do we have
Somebody
microphones?
passing the microphones around? Where are them?
Just be loud and we'll get the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay, and if you could just state your name and affiliation.
I'm Jeff Lightfoot with
Voilà,
the
voilà.
Atlantic Council with Jones Group. And to the Deputy Minister, I wanted to ask, you're about 6 months away from the Wrocław summit that Tom Cunningham mentioned, about 6 months away from Dubrovnik. So we're kind of at the midpoint. In the Dubrovnik summit, David and I had the pleasure of being there. It's a very nice place to be in August. And it was nice, but it wasn't clear to me that it really produced any tangible outcome. So you're about 6 months away. What needs to happen between now and then for Wrocław to be a success that produces something that shows that 3 Seas North-South corridor is really real?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. I was also there in Dubrovnik, and we expect to have the continuation in Wrocław. So this time it will be Poland who will host 3 Seas initiative in Wrocław in the beginning of July. So certainly the subject that we discussed there, which is completing north-south corridors from the south, would have its importance. And in this regard, Kirk Island terminal is still a practical objective that needs to be translated into concrete actions. But on our side in Poland, we are doing this part of the job by thinking about how north-south corridor could be materialized. And in this regard, we did an important step by submitting to our colleagues in the European Commission a proposition to develop Polish-Slovakia interconnector, which would be part of this north-south corridor and which would help to transport gas from Northern Gate and from terminal in Świnoujście to Slovakia, but then also to the south, to Hungary. And also we have in mind Ukraine as also being part of this bigger security network of pipes. So these are the things certainly that we are pursuing. We are making progress on them, and we should continue.
Okay. Would you like to
Thank you. Deborah Kagan, Johns Hopkins Thies. First, I want to thank the Director General and all of the panelists for their open-mindedness toward the new administration. I think it's always good to try not to predict too hard and then be wrong. I want to say on the one comment on Nord Stream 2 versus what this means for the U.S., I think if there was a competition between backing off, the U.S. administration backing off of Nord Stream 2 and the possibility of lucrative markets for U.S. Suppliers and producers, which would create a huge number of jobs in the United States, the latter might win, even with this administration. So I think I'm going to keep an open mind on that, because I think based on Secretary of Energy nominee Perry's testimony on the Hill and he was just voted out of committee, I believe, this morning. He was very open about these exports to Europe and other places. Having said that, I wanted to ask a question to the panelists about spot market prices. One of the things U.S. producers are going to be looking for is a willingness of European customers to actually sign contracts. I think they know that the era of 10-year contracts may be over, but they're still looking for contracts, you know, in terms to finance and the shipping costs and everything else. And it's my view that some of our European colleagues have been lulled into a false sense of security by buying on the spot market, that they think those low prices are going to be infinite, that they're never going to end. And I think that might be mortgaging an energy security future, and I wanted to know your views on that.
So, long-term contracts? Or?
Yes, I will say the following. First of all, you refer to the end of a ban regarding oil export, but also the start of some export of gas from US to Europe. And I would like to say this has been an important achievement resulting from the US-EU cooperation on energy. This has not resulted at all to any other negotiation, in particular in the context of the TTIP. The fact that US and EU on energy, in connection also with Congress in US, have been in situation to finish at the end of 2015 with the decision. This has been profitable for us and profitable for US also producers. Because, let me say clearly, we are a big import, we Europeans. Our gas market is representing more or less each year around 400 billion cubic metrics of gas. And our domestic production is declining in UK as well as in the Netherlands. Accordingly, any time we have global market with more quantities and global market becoming more competitive and liquid, these are good news for us. As we explained also, it was important in our situation to push LNG. We presented a new European LNG strategy just before the last G7 in Japan. Extremely important because in our views, you know very well, what was important was to enrich or to add some additional energy infrastructure, floating terminal, interconnection, in an area in which we have still some member states vulnerable and dependent. Because the panorama, the existing panorama is characterized by many infrastructure in Western Europe, in France, in Spain, in UK, but less in Eastern Europe. And we are very pleased with the present development in Poland, in Lithuania, but also in Croatia, but also in Greece with Alexandroupolis terminal, etc., etc. And this will be part of our approach regarding diversification. Regarding our responsibility in the context of European policy, this is our work to facilitate this development and to identify key European new projects in terms of interconnection or in terms of new gas terminal. For the rest, it is of course up to the promoters of projects to negotiate contract. But we will insist vis-à-vis also the new US administration to prolong the present ongoing development regarding this capacity to export gas, because this is new, only 1 year, and for many of our member states, including or in particular also Poland. This is extremely important, but we, at the level of European Commission, and we have an excellent bilateral cooperation on energy issues with Poland, let me say that publicly. This will be tomorrow even more important than yesterday.
U.S. LNG isn't just under competition from Russian gas or other sources of gas. It's also facing competition from coal in Europe and from renewables. I mean, what do you think the chances are, or do you think there's a risk to the European market sort of passing U.S. gas developers by?
I don't see it in a short run. But answering your question, I think two ingredients must meet together: innovative technologies and competitive market. We have innovative technologies in US. I mean, shale revolution is an absolute breakthrough. And we have been lucky, or we have been intelligent or anticipating the events by deciding in 2005 to build an LNG terminal in Poland. Anticipating that it might be a lever for security of supply, but not imagining that it could be to that point opening a new era of energy supplies, because LNG right now becomes just like oil. You can just transport it by ship, and then it's. So that's an extremely interesting development. Innovative technologies has completely changed the America's position in the energy world, but not only in the energy world. We can think about what would be the position of United States regarding, for example, OPEC. What would be the impact of OPEC if there were no shale revolution in US? And then we are following very closely the prices, the spot prices of LNG. And here we come to the idea of competitive market. Competitive market means a market in which also you can have a comparable frameworks. And one issue is legal frameworks, but the other is that we are still having two different sets of benchmarks. You have Henry Hub in US, and you have TTF in Europe. If we want to trade gas in Europe and increase the share of LNG from American companies, I think the question mark would be to what extent they should adapt also to the context of this big 400 billion cubic meter perspective market. If the both ingredients are met together, I think it could be really very interesting for both parties.
Ambassador Morningstar.
Yeah, a couple of points. First of all, just on the point on renewables and new technologies, all of that is going to relate ultimately energy efficiency. All of that's going to relate ultimately to gas demand, and it's more of a mid to long term issue, I think. Whereas Deborah's question, I think, would relate more to short to midterm. So let me just respond briefly to Deborah. I certainly understand your point, and I think it is possible to get lulled into some kind of feeling of security with respect to prices, but I guess I'm not quite as worried as you would be with respect to that issue. First of all, I would say that it's really important that European countries and companies not get involved in long-term contracts as best as that can be done, because we've seen how the lower prices in the last couple of years has affected prices in Europe, even with respect to renegotiation of long-term contracts. So I do think it's important, and I think long-term contracts will be avoided, I hope, as much as possible. There are going to be swings in price, but the point being, as long as there is diversification of supply, particularly with respect to LNG, whether from the United States or other sources, that is going to help keep prices down on a relative basis, whatever the swings, whatever the swings might be. So yeah, I mean, there's always been volatility in prices. I don't think there are going to be huge swings like maybe there have been in the past, but there will be some swings, and it's important to have a lot of LNG available. One risk that I've heard, which I'm not sure I think is a huge risk, is if there is a global increase in gas prices, and if that affects Henry Hub prices, that could lead the administration perhaps to rely on or to implement a national security exemption and to restrict exports in order to keep prices lower in the United States. I don't really see that likely to happen. I mean, if there were to be an increase in prices, I think you'd just see a lot more U.S. gas production. And I don't think there would be any need to restrict exports. So yeah, it's an issue, but I think that the market will work itself out. There may be some increases up and down over time, but at least at this point, I don't expect anything dramatic. As long as there's availability, and as long as there's diversification, and that Europe continues to push that strategy.
Okay, we got another question. Jean in the back.
Thanks. This is Jean Chemnick at E&E News. I wondered, a twofold question. One, the U.S. is likely to leave or at least scale back its commitment to the Paris Agreement here fairly soon. What kind of message will that send to Europe, and how might that affect other aspects of the European relationship with the U.S.? And secondly, Rex Tillerson, is poised to become Secretary of State. How do you see him influencing energy diplomacy programs at the State Department, and how may they shift? Thanks.
I guess I can start. One, if you make the assumption that the United States pulls back from Paris, and that's still an assumption, I think it would have a terrible effect. Overall on our foreign policy, and I think it could have a spillover effect into other areas of our foreign policy. Speaking from this podium before, I've said, and I think Dominique will remember certainly, when we pulled back from Kyoto, I was still our ambassador to the EU. And that had a really serious effect, not just on Kyoto, but it had a serious effect on our dealings overall with the EU, with European countries, with cooperation on other issues. If we were to pull back, I think that we do have to recognize that Paris would go on without us, and that all we would be doing would be ceding leadership, which we have, I think, successfully attained to a great extent during the Obama administration, but ceding leadership to others, including China. And I think China would jump right on the bandwagon and would claim to be, along with the EU and others, to be the leader on implementing climate change. Having said all that, I would be surprised if we did pull back from Paris. I don't think we'll be as active. I think for the period of this administration, it may be more laissez-faire. But again, I think we have to make the argument to this administration what a mistake it would be, because there's so much we have to gain. Forget climate change and what you think about climate change. There'd be so much to gain from development of green technologies, to making sure that we were leaders in green technologies, to make sure that we were creating the kinds of jobs that we could create, that we cooperated with others, such as the EU, with respect to innovation in developing these technologies. So, I think there could be some pullback. would hope that we would not withdraw. Some say, well, it's a long withdrawal process. That's true, but if we said we were going to withdraw, I don't think the long withdrawal process really means much. We just wouldn't be doing anything. But I hope that we don't get ourselves into that position. And I think that, some of a person like Tillerson has recognized climate change as being important. I think Exxon has actually supported carbon pricing to an extent anyway. I don't think he would advocate pulling back, and I would hope, given his energy background, that the State Department would still be very active in the energy sector. I would find it hard to believe, for example, that he would eliminate the Energy Bureau that was set up, during the past administration. I've learned never to say never, but I'm somewhat hopeful, more hopeful with Tillerson than if it had been some of the other possible secretaries of state.
Director General Story?
Yes, Emily, the Paris Agreement is an historical agreement, regrouping all countries in the world. And US has been instrumental, has played an important role for the finalization of the agreement. At the same time, we are considering that as a real challenge for energy, because, in reality, the implementation of Paris is, first of all, an energy challenge. Why? Because more than 2/3 of emissions are resulting from production and use of energy. Accordingly, presently, it's more important than ever to consider that as you said, Richard, a real economic opportunity. An economic opportunity in order to adapt energy policy in a way profitable, in fact, for US economy, for EU economy, and the rest of the world the same, and in a way profitable for American people and European people. And the challenge is, first of all, an economic challenge. When I refer before to the measures aiming to develop energy efficiency, these are measures in situation to contribute a lot to the reduction of emission, but at the same time to contribute also to the relaunch of economic development everywhere, including in the cities. But profitable in terms also, at the end of the day, profitable for all people regarding quality of life and quality of comfort. This is the real presentation of things. And regarding your point concerning Mr. Tillerson, one thing is to be the boss of one of the most important energy company, ExxonMobil. Another point is to become the boss of US diplomacy. But I am completely confident he will play completely the new role, incorporating all the points we discussed this morning in Washington. And regarding energy, because energy will have this decisive role, he will be well placed in order to see how to address the challenge.
Let me just add one point, and that is that as far as withdrawing from Paris, one of the biggest constituencies that we have here for not withdrawing from Paris is business. And there, as many of you know, there was something like 350 companies that met a couple of months ago, basically telling the new administration, don't withdraw from Paris. I don't even think that the international energy companies would like to see us withdraw from Paris. Because not only, when I talked about spillover effects in the foreign policy area, one of the things I found when we withdrew from Kyoto in 2001, I had businesses coming to me when I was the ambassador saying, still the ambassador, the Bush administration kept me hidden there for 8 months, at least Colin Powell and Rich Armitage did. But the companies would, come to me and say, how can the administration do this? It's making it difficult for us to operate in various countries who are saying, why should we cooperate with you when your government is doing this? So I think that there is a very strong business constituency to stay with Paris, and I think that will have, I hope, a serious political effect. Did you want to add anything?
Maybe to have a perspective, which is a perspective of a member country of European Union, because we have two frameworks. One is Paris Agreement, which is an international framework for over 190 countries, yes, and the other is inside European Union. And Paris Agreement provides which much more flexible way to attain the objectives. And in this regard, I think that there is room to find the specific, for each country, a specific way of reaching the goals without undermining its economic competitiveness. Because as Dominique said, this is a very big challenge for the energy because, in fact, lots of efforts are concentrated on the energy.
Okay, we got another. Maybe, why don't we take both questions? You had a question as well? So let's take them both and then answer.
Morning, Bob Icord for the Atlantic Council, formerly with State Department. Thank you all, and Dominique, it's good to see you again. Hello. The energy community is now past its 10th anniversary. And as you know, Dominique, the U.S. worked very closely with Commission and other EU states to create the energy community. And as Dick pointed out, that legal framework and its expansion to the countries in the Balkans and to to Ukraine, Moldova, and recently to Georgia, sets a framework for development of diversification and energy and a competitive energy market. Yeah. What is your sense as to reflections on how it's done over the 10 years on issues such as Southern Corridor and other key issues? And what's your sense of the future? Where is it going? And is it still a viable approach to European security?
Okay, and let's just take one more since we're going to have to wrap up.
I didn't know there was an answer to that question yet. My name is Mark Haynes. I'm with what's called the Next Generation Nuclear Plant Industry Alliance here in town. And this is a question for Minister Kurtika. Would you be willing, you mentioned nuclear energy, and there hadn't been much talk about it, but would you be willing to talk about the potential for cooperation between the U.S. and Poland, and maybe EU more broadly, on the development of inherently safe, next-generation, high-temperature nuclear power for security of supply and substitution for natural gas in industry?
Okay, maybe if you want to take that one first, then we can go back to the broader question.
Yep. So thank you very much for your question. Indeed, I didn't enter into details regarding the nuclear projects, but we do see a potential in small reactors of next generation. And we have opened a cooperation, international cooperation regarding that. And your alliance plays an important role in this. We have also a comparable network in European Union, as you know. And we think that there is a big niche, market niche, to be developed, which would not only satisfy economic constraints, because for the moment, the biggest challenge in America is to compete with gas. but in European Union it's a little bit different, and in the world we shouldn't forget it's different. There are countries like China building new fourth generation reactors, and we as Europeans and as Americans, we should strive to keep the path with these developments. And in this regard, we are pursuing very actively a project of developing a high-temperature gas-cooled reactor in Poland in cooperation, international cooperation, with many colleagues from different countries in the world, including United States, but also from European countries. And I do believe it is the one of the answer for bringing together us around a very, very smart objective. Just when I'm answering for the second question, although it was asked for Dominique, regarding energy community, we as Poland, we consider it as an important tool for strengthening relations between Central European countries. And as you know, historically, the links were rather done in the axis east-west or west-east, depends on where you go. But we are striving to develop north-south cooperation, and in this regard, energy community plays an important role, and Dominique is doing a great job in this regard. And last but not least, energy community is a factor also of stability and brings European legal framework for these countries. And I think that they did a tremendous job in terms of helping Ukraine with gas new law, and we should support it.
Yes, I can only add the following. Energy community is a real energy success, first of all. I co-chair the last energy community ministerial in Sarajevo, and it was crystal clear that all the progress made were impressive. Why? Because energy community is a unique model of exporting to neighboring countries our legislation in terms of market, but not only, because now you are also implementing in these countries, in Western Balkan countries, but also in Ukraine, but also now in Georgia, because the last meeting in Sarajevo was that of Georgia joining the club. This is a fantastic opportunity to do the things based on the same approach regarding market, the same approach regarding all key energy issues, based on transposition of our acquis. This has been instrumental for Ukraine, Michel, as you refer to the transposition of, in fact, our gas directive. And we will prolong that regarding regional electricity market. And in addition, we have decided now to go also into the same direction regarding all aspects of interconnection and key energy infrastructure. Accordingly, we will identify in common the key interconnection for gas and electricity indispensable for this market with the Balkan. Donc, it's, I don't know any other success based on the same approach regarding market and all energy issues. And I would like to pay a tribute also to US for having supported this approach since the beginning. As you said, it's the 10th anniversary, but 10 is it's still a very young new organization, energy community, but functioning very well, with an active secretariat installed in Vienna, and in situation with our help to support all the effort of all this group of countries. Thank you very much for pointing this important component of our energy action and initiative and diplomacy too.
Okay, and I think with that, we're at our time. So thank you all very much for coming, and thank you all for taking the time out of your days and what I'm sure busy DC schedule.
Thank you.